Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. So this evening is the first of a series of later in the day, towards the end of the day, or bedtime sessions. I'm sure it's not actually your bedtime. But the idea behind these sessions is to try and create a space where hopefully you have finished your responsibilities for the day and can really, give yourself the time to relax, unwind, share some Dharma together, and get yourself in a good state for a relaxing night's sleep. But not just that, I wanted to take this opportunity to start to share some of my insights into the Buddha's Dharma. Being the end of the day, I would imagine that you are able to be here because you've got the time to, and if you're tuning in, it's because you are interested in the essence of what it is that the Buddha taught us. You might have been meditating with me for a while now, and everything that I teach you has been informed by the teachings that the Buddha shared, or what we call his Dhamma, over 25 centuries ago. Was without doubt the most complete spiritual roadmap that has ever been offered up in the history of man. It takes a long time to fully fathom the depth and breadth of what it was that the Buddha was sharing with us. And I dare say that we can probably be practicing meditation for quite a long time before we get to a point where we really understand what the Buddha specifically was pointing at. Now, of course, there are all kinds of traditions in which meditation figures as a big part of spiritual life. So, clearly meditation is not unique to the teachings of the Buddha. But there are aspects about the way that the Buddha taught meditation that are unique to his teachings. So what is it specifically, over and above the general guidance that most spiritual traditions are able to offer us about living well, being considerate, perhaps tuning in to a higher intelligence behind life, connecting to something that we might consider to be sacred or divine? These are common threads throughout all spiritual practices. All spiritual traditions point towards something that lies behind a veil of our ordinary perception that might crystallize or bring into focus a deeper understanding and appreciation of what life is, which without that focus might be somewhat lost to us or something of a mystery. Science has taken the role of trying to demystify life for us in the last few centuries. But the bottom line is, life remains an extraordinary mystery. There are the big questions that man has always gone out in search of in his spiritual quest, still remain unanswered by science. For all the insight we might have gained into the mechanics of life, the deeper existential questions that have lingered in our minds since mankind first trod upon this earth still remain a mystery to the scientific world. They are as yet not answered emphatically or to a point where we can say this is that. And yet it remains that there are common threads appearing through almost all spiritual traditions, even though the conclusions that may be drawn from them may vary and vary greatly. There are certain spiritual or certain threads that run and that keep reappearing. And obviously, there's no end to the number of human beings who have immerse themselves in spiritual inquiry throughout history. And there's no end to the number of human beings who did not reach a point of coming to any conclusion or being able to stand upon anything more than what they might consider or would have to admit to be views or ideas that we may subscribe to or refute. But behind the sort of speculative or reflective or contemplative part of spiritual endeavor, there is a long tradition of yogic practice. And in those traditions of deep practice, the practice of the cultivation of the mind, the polishing of the lens through which we look into life, if it gets to the point where that lens is sufficiently polished, regardless of by what means, there is a consistency in what it is we come to discern when we use a clear and polished lens that is undistorted by the conditioned aspect of our mind. There are fundamental spiritual truths that reveal themselves to us in stages as our mind becomes more and more refined, and that remain hidden to us while our mind remains in a state of speculative confusion. We use reflection, contemplation, speculation to fill the gap in our understanding, to try to come to an idea that satisfies us. That we cannot call Dharma. So what is it that the Buddha called Dharma? The Buddha said, having started upon his journey of teaching, having finished his own spiritual quest and reached that point of what we might call enlightenment, he frequently would implore those who came to seek instructions from him, I do not ask you to believe what I say. You should not subscribe to what I say because I am the Buddha and I am respected by many. You should not subscribe to a book that has been revered for generations just on account of it having been revered. You should not listen and take as gospel the word of a wise teacher who may be highly respected. You should look with your own eyes and polish the lens through which you look until you can see for yourself whether what I say is true. Now, when we actually pull apart the Buddha's teachings, we do not see an elaborate spiritual landscape laid out in front of us. We do not see a complex spiritual worldview. Many of the existential questions he refused to answer explicitly, but he implored us to continue to look for ourselves. The essence of the Buddha's Dhamma is an invitation to investigate for ourselves, according to a roadmap that he laid down that was not prescriptive by way of view. He simply laid out an extremely comprehensive vehicle that we could follow for our own training. He was asking us to be yogis ourselves, so that one day we could see for ourselves whether what he said was true. He implored us not to stand upon views. A Dhamma, according to the Buddha, is a living universal truth. It is the way of things. And as such, whether we understand them, have seen them, know them to be true or not, the universe, the world around us, life, functions. It displays itself according to spiritual truths. It has a way of being. There is a suchness to life that accounts for why it is the way it is, how it is that it displays and manifests itself in the extraordinary and varied ways that it does. Behind it, there is not a random series of processes at work but an extraordinary intelligence that is always at work and that does not vary from one place to another, from one time to another. It is universal and seamless. And that when we see the intelligence at work, we understand how and why life is the way it is. This is what the Buddha means when he uses the word Dharma. He is simply talking about the way of things. He is not talking about ideas or views that we might come to. He is talking about what is and what remains as is, regardless of our understanding of it or not. And his entire path was a path of investigating for ourselves to see what it is that shows itself to us when we look carefully enough at what is going on. He said that between the top of our head and the soles of our feet, if we can look carefully at the way in which life expresses itself through us as a human being, we will come to understand everything around us in the world and the universe as a whole. So this is what he means by Dhamma. Dhamma translates as the truth. Now the truth is a very loaded word in our minds because we think about the truth. What is the truth? Well, no teaching is necessarily the truth. The truth simply is what is. Every aspect of your life, everything in it, around it, you, and everything that's going on within you is the truth. It is Dhamma. Life is the Dhamma. The Dhamma is life. There is no wavering, nothing wavers from it. Everything arises as it, as an expression of it. And it is our not seeing and knowing it for what it is that the Buddha says is the cause of our suffering. We don't understand what's happening to us. And so we bring ourselves to suffering. But the extraordinary and life-affirming thing about all of this is that every time we reach a point of seeing life for what it actually is, the seeing it frees us from suffering. The seeing life for what it is cuts off in us the tendency and capacity to bring ourselves and others to suffering. This is what the Buddha was positing, he was suggesting, and he was asking us to discover for ourselves. What that actually implies is that suffering is only the result of confusion. And for all the misery we might see around us, all of it is an expression of not understanding what life is, and as a result living not in accordance with its intelligence. All suffering is a reflection of living out of balance with the intelligence behind our lives. When we see the intelligence behind our lives, our inclination to live out of balance with it is cut off at the root. And this is what the Buddha calls the causal cessation of suffering. And he didn't say that it would happen differently from one person to another. Reliably, consistently, and every single time, that much we have come to see life for what it actually is, we cut off at the root suffering. We free ourselves at the root from suffering. Now, if the Buddha was right, then we wouldn't be suffering now if we got to the bottom of what life is. And here we are in a world where we apparently understand it better than we ever have, and yet the elephant in the room suffering is in no way less now than it ever has been. We might even come to say it appears to be more. How could it be that coming to a deep understanding of the way of things would prompt in us more and more suffering, would bring us or cause us or prompt us to bring ourselves and others and the world around us to more suffering if we were genuinely coming to a deeper understanding of what this is? So, my friends, it would appear that something fundamental and absolutely vital is missing in our standard, accepted understanding of what life is these days. Perhaps the Buddha saw something 25 centuries ago that he tried to share with us, which for those 25 centuries has freed every being that saw or came to see what he saw from the same suffering that he freed himself from. And yet here we are today, still bound up in suffering, entangled in a knot of suffering, trying to work out how we might avoid this suffering. What can we possibly do? What is it that we might have missed? What is it that we didn't see at work in our lives that would cause us to continuously walk in the wrong direction with regards to freeing ourselves from suffering? That's what we might start to investigate on these evenings when we gather, when we've attended to our worldly concerns and our duties and responsibilities, and we have a little bit of free time to meditate together and to investigate. What was it that the Buddha came to see that we might not have seen yet? That seeing it might turn the tide and start the process of bringing us out of the suffering that we haven't yet freed ourselves from. All right, well, for my discourse this evening, I've got a little story for you. This is the story of the ox herder, and it's a wonderful illustration of the journey that we go on from the early stages of trying to figure out all this when our mind is completely all over the shop and utterly unfocused. The stages that we go through as we learn to concentrate, to settle, to clear the dust from our eyes and start to see for ourselves. So enjoy, it's just 20 minutes or so, and then after the discourse we can meditate together. Where does it lead? What's the end of the path? Yeah. There's a very nice Zen story, which is illustrated in a number of pictures. I think they're called the ox herder pictures. Yeah. And they illustrate the stages that we go through on the process of freeing ourselves from suffering and then opening completely to life. The reason we're freeing ourselves from suffering, or we're doing this work, is so that we can open completely to life, so we can see what it is that we've had. So, the very, very first stages, you are literally, your mind is like a wild animal. You've got very little rein over it. So, in order to get concentrated initially, you are having to quite often grit your teeth and knuckle down and hang on. The way it's described is like this. A farmer has a young ox. And he's just got this ox and he's teaching it to plough the fields with him. It's a little bit unruly. It's hard work. And at lunchtime, the farmer likes to go into the wood, into a shaded area and sit by a watering hole to have his lunch. But every time he does, of course, this young ox is just running off. The only way you can get this ox to stay still is by tying it to the tree next to him. So he goes into his wood and he ties the ox by a ring through its nose, poor thing, to a tree. And the ox is desperately bored and frustrated, impatient, and it keeps trying to run away, and it's pulling and pulling on this rope, and it can't, and it keeps exhausting itself, but it keeps tugging this way and tugging that way, but it's tied to the tree. Eventually it realizes, well, I'm not going anywhere, am I? So when the farmer goes into the watering hole to have his lunch, the ox eventually realizes, well, I might as well just sit down and wait for him to be done. After a few weeks, the ox gets it. It's time to chill. So the farmer's able to take the rope off and not tether the ox anymore, and they walk together at lunchtime, having worked all morning, sit down by the watering hole, and they take their rest. And that's basically the early stages of training the mind. To begin with, you are literally, possibly even going to have to go in, 1, 2, 3, out. You are going to have to tie your mind to your object to make it stay there, because it isn't going to want to. It hasn't had the flavor of serenity. It doesn't know that it's actually a relief to have nothing to do, like that ox hadn't clocked that actually it's time out, time to chill. So you have to tie it. You have to make strong determination to get concentrated in the early stages. So the quality of your concentration has got maybe this stiffness to it. Otherwise you're falling into dullness. Once you get the flavor of, you know what, it's quite nice being concentrated, some part of the mind inclines towards serenity. It realizes actually what I do want is to feel peaceful. And some of the energy that pulls on the mind starts to fall away and it settles. So that's the very early stages of training. Anyway, the ox herder, the story of the ox herder goes on. And eventually he says, right, you know, he's goes off to be a yogi, and he abandons his ox and his farm, and he heads off to a quiet place where he delights in his samadhi, and he practices his concentration until he gets, you know, in seclusion. Sometimes you do, if you want to experience the most rarefied states of consciousness, until your mind is extremely equanimous to the things that arise around you, you'll need to seclude yourself from distractions to get the flavor of what your mind is capable of experiencing. So you go somewhere quiet, okay, like this, where you're undistracted, and you start to get more concentration and experience more serenity. You may need to go somewhere where there's even less busy than this, without so much instructions. Now you know what to do. You come and stay close enough to the teacher where you can get a little nudge when you need it, but be left to get on with your practice. And then when you're really confident, you can probably go all the way to the top of the mountain and only come down every now and then, just for a little clarification. So there is that period of going off to be an ascetic. That's what the Buddha did it. He left his palace to go and be an ascetic. And he practiced ardently for a few years. And then comes the moment of breakthrough where you realize the true nature of your mind and that sublime experience of stillness and emptiness as the nature of your mind. And you delight in being completely free from affliction. And in that secluded state, one is prompted to think, or likely to think, that one is enlightened. Truly, there's nothing vexing my mind. There's not a trace of any taint or disturbance in my mind. It is utter clarity and sublime peace. I must be awakened. If you stay up in that cave undisturbed by anything in this world, you may well fall into the illusion that you are enlightened. But does it mean that you are free from suffering and its causes? You don't know until you put yourself back in front of them. So the final stage of the ox herder's journey doesn't end up in his cave on the mountaintop. The last picture is him sitting on top of his bull, riding it back into town, knowing that he had tamed his own heart and realized the nature of his own mind, and he literally dances. He's playing his flute, sitting atop his ox, riding it back into town, going to find out for himself whether he's freed himself from suffering or not. So that delicate place that we have to find, now, you know, back then the town was probably not as hectic as it is these days, but it's no doubt had its distractions. You have to find out for yourself whether you can be in front of things without them causing suffering, without you becoming entangled to the point of suffering. You know, that's last part is a delicate process. There's no point in kidding yourself, because if you put yourself in front of things that stick to you and you become entangled with, slowly the quality of your mind changes and you lose that sense of freedom or clarity and peace and serenity. So you take the knock when you realize, no, my mind is not yet equanimous to that, and you learn from it and you come back and you keep working. So, you know, but the point is that ox herder went back to play his flute, dance, knowing that he wasn't going to become intoxicated with it. That's the last part of the journey, when you realize that what you came here for, you can do and have done. And it's a gradual process. To kid yourself that you can still dance in the middle of it all without becoming intoxicated with it, it's delusion. To kid yourself that you don't need to remove yourself from distractions in order to train, develop, hone, polish, clarify your mind, and then recognize your true nature, is delusion. Because that ox herder was no longer intoxicated or entangled with the things he was dancing with. So he could delight in them for what they were without them sticking. That's what we call appreciative joy. He's now able to live life totally. You have to give it up and know that you can and have, so that you can have it back completely without it causing suffering. So, you know, it's a complete circle, if you like. We have to work out where we're at on that circle and make the choices, weave into our lives the steps that are appropriate for us to be taking, if we want to progress along it. If you are at the stage where your mind is still rough or gross and prone to affliction, you find yourself knocked this way and back by the changing fortune and misfortunes of your life, then your equanimity is not strong yet. If you don't find yourself calm in the face of challenges, or you don't find yourself calm when you're on your own, then you are not settled within yourself yet. So the first stage you have to do is to get to that place where you're settled within yourself. And then you need to get to the place where you can take a knock without being knocked over, which is the sort of resilience it takes to be able to go back and dance. So it doesn't end on the mountaintop, all on your Todd with nobody about. It can do. Many do. Many delight in that simplicity and that seclusion to the point they've got no desire to go back and dance in the town. But you will not know that your mind is free until you've been back and found out that you can and it doesn't stick. Does that make sense? Yeah. So life is there to be lived. It's there to be lived skillfully or messily. There you go. But the living of life skillfully is a very profound experience. The living of life unskillfully is inordinately vexing. Like I said, same thing. Like the mind you bring to your life will determine whether you are pleased with it, in love with it, or at war with it, regardless of what your life throws your way. So reclaim some of the energy that you are spending trying to wrap it up nicely and tie a little bow around it, put a cherry on top. Reclaim some of that energy and put that energy into learning to fall in love with the life you've already got. So whatever life it is, whatever you've got, whether it's full of unbelievable challenges or it's just an ordinary life, when you fall in love with it, you're free because it's your truth. Don't bemoan the fact that you're challenged, because that might be the part that elevates you to a place you would never otherwise got. So don't reject anything that comes your way in life. When you fail to get something you deeply wanted, that puts you on your backside, or you find something in some kind of grace or humility in you and some kind of, okay, fair enough, we'll do something else. And you just get on. So this capacity to accept it as it is the ultimate empowerment tool. No bigging up your idea about yourself and telling yourself you're jolly special and it's all good when you don't feel special or good. And no feeling special is going to do it for you. It's not about feeling special. It's about feeling authentic and honest and true to yourself. So, I don't know, are you tying your ox to the tree? Tie your ox to the tree. You're learning to sit down with your ox next to you. Enjoy that. If it's time to head off and put your head down for a while, go and put your head down for a while. Time to walk back into town and play your song. Play your song. Each step of the journey is profoundly meaningful in its own right. But be where you are. Don't wish you were somewhere else. Because you've got this life, it's okay. You've got the faculties you need to live it. You've got the faculties you need to see your challenges as your teacher. That's all you need. That's all you need to succeed in life. And the faculties that you need to see your challenges as your teacher. This young boy is less than 3 years old. And he's in Great Ormond Street Hospital. No, yes, he is now in Great Ormond Street Hospital. With a very severe leukemia. Fighting for his life. It happens all the time. And, he's utterly, utterly dependent on what others may or may not be able to do for him. He's not in charge of his own well-being and his welfare now. His future hangs in the balance in the hands of others. That happens a lot. When you're not in that position, do everything you can to not get into that position. When you have the faculties that are necessary to inform you about how to live well, use them so that you can live well. Because life is very delicate. And it falls apart in no end of ways on account of not being honoured, or not being respected, or not being seen as sacred, or not being taken care of sufficiently. So there's an awful lot of suffering in the world, and there's an awful lot of people who are going to have to work very hard for a very, very long time to free themselves from affliction. But even those people can free themselves from suffering the moment that they can accept that what's in front of them is their truth. And be with it. And be with it and see it as your teacher. One day it might be really, really challenging. You might have to take something very tough as your teacher. So take the little knocks and the relative challenges that you've got now. Bring them into the fold and don't reject them. Don't think that they shouldn't be there. Let them be the ground upon which you transform yourself into a more noble person. You know, when you see somebody facing inordinate challenges and you see them surmount them, ask yourself, do I think I could have found that within myself? Humble yourself. I remember being a meditation teacher, sitting before people like you many years ago, my dad dying, getting ill, his life coming to an end, going through all the dismantling and being very unhappy, very challenged by it and surmounting it and finding his bliss before he died. And I looked at myself and I thought, you know, Burgs, you're sitting in front of all these people. You don't know that you could find that inside yourself. You see? So everything has a capacity to be our teacher. Even the things that we would most hate happening to us. Live life fearlessly. You know, and just tell yourself, well, if things don't go my way, I will find it within myself to be with that experience and find some grace in it. And you will walk a straight path. You know, life is precious. And we need to honor it. And we need to stop doing the things that forget that it's precious. Stop doing the things to ourselves that are rooted in forgetting that it's precious. And finding ourselves in a place where we don't feel anything anymore because we're so numb. Our numbness is our teacher as well, telling us to wake up. Our numbness is telling us to slap ourselves in the face and go, come on, get it together. Where does it lead? What's the end? All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that little story of the ox herder. Maybe you could, each one of you, identify in some way with where you are personally at, and as a result of that, I suppose, inform yourselves a little better about the approach that is appropriate for you, for where you are right now, because that's your truth. And what's really important is that we don't compare ourselves to others all the time. This comparing ourselves to others as better, same, or worse is pride. Thinking that we should be doing what someone else is doing when what they're doing may be far from our truth. So that parami of truthfulness that I mentioned in that talk, it's so key, this parami of being honest with ourselves so that we can meet ourselves where we truly are right now. Because that's your truth. And that's the next stage of your journey and your perfect teacher right now, whatever it is. All right, well, we will continue with our Dharma at Bedtime series on another day. But for now, let's meditate as if it was time to go to sleep. How wonderful that we can really, really unwind now in our meditation, knowing that we have nothing more that we have to do today. So wherever you are, sit relaxed and comfortable. Remind yourself that if you've had a busy day and you've had to gear yourself up and wind yourself up, maybe even into something akin to a frenzy to get everything done, remind yourself that you do not need to take that state and that attitude with you into your time of rest. This is your time of rest. You have attended to what needed to be done today. And if you haven't finished it, then you can certainly pick it up again tomorrow. But don't let your rest time be invaded by your duties and responsibilities. Lay them down completely and without remainder, and give yourself utterly to this moment as you prepare yourself for rest. So let's start with a long in-breath and breathe out any remaining tension from the day that you've just been through. Look ahead to the night ahead with a blissful anticipation, knowing it is a time in which you have nothing that you must do. It is your time entirely. Embrace the idea. It's time to take rest. So relax deeply into your body and the tension that you might be holding on account of the day that has just ended. Try and relax into it. Let it unwind. Let your physical body relax deeply to your core. Let your flesh and muscles soften and loosen off around your bones and all the gripping and tensing that you might have built up during the day. Let it start to drop off you and fade away, dissolve and release. Bring your attention gently into your body. We are not meditating now to scrutinize everything. We do not need to be overly attentive. We simply want to bring ourselves into a state of natural rest. So you only need to recognize the feeling tone within you and where you are still carrying any sense of gripping or holding on. When you meditate before bed, there is nothing that you need to hold on to. Even your meditation can be let go if it opens the door to rest and to sleep. So relax completely and feel the comfort of ease start to spread through you, where during the day you might have been holding nothing but tension and agitation. Let your worries and cares drop away. The night is entirely yours. No one has claim over it. There are no responsibilities. There are nothing. There is nothing to attend to. So leave everything as it is and settle in to that still place, that quiet place that is home in your heart. That place that you go to most nights without knowing it. We drop away into unconsciousness and the rest of sleep. But before you drop away completely, try to touch consciously that place of rest, that still place in your heart that reveals itself when you leave everything. When you leave everything as it is to settle. Let your heart settle, calm down like water. If sometimes you find yourself struggling to fall asleep, it is on account of one or both of two things. The first reason we may find ourselves not sleeping at night is because we are still far too interested in what is going on in our minds. You can't think yourself to sleep by resolving all your thoughts. For as long as you attend to your mind, you will stay awake even if you are exhausted. So please, learn to be utterly disinterested in what goes on in your mind so that it can fade to the background and not pull on you. Over-attentiveness robs us of sleep. This is not the time to attend to things. Let go. Let go. Just let it go. And the second thing that robs us of sleep is that our heart has not settled yet for its true nature to shine through and bring us into a state of rest. Well, your heart is like water, and it is only disturbed by your own mind. So this toiling and grasping at and reacting to and worrying about and attending to and trying to resolve things is what keeps your heart agitated. But its nature is total rest. So as you leave everything behind, discard all those things that you've been grappling with, and just rest within yourself and relax. Let your heart return gently, gradually, in stages, to its mirror-like natural state. Any tension that you are still holding, any trace of tension that you are still holding, take one more deep in-breath and breathe that tension out. Hey. And tune in to the stillness that is there waiting in the background, waiting to draw you into rest and sleep. Let your mind soften. Let any trace of gripping in your mind soften and release. Just float upon that state of total rest with nothing to add and nothing to take. Rest there. Feel yourself dropping more deeply into stillness. Feel that which is not yet still becoming still gradually as your state of rest deepens, as you become quieter still. Just rest. There is a light that shines in your heart that is as bright as the sun. See if you can't touch it, rest in it, feel it. It rests in a state of total stillness. It is utterly undisturbed, and it is coming home to that state, that clear light of natural rest. That means we are deeply restored when we take a break from our daily life. There is an intelligence behind your life that attends to you, that cares for you while you rest. Learning to recognize it and to touch it reminds us that we are safe and that it is all right to let go. Relax deeply through your whole being as you let everything soften. And rest in the clear light of your heart and the stillness that surrounds you. The stillness that is the ground of your being. Before we take rest, let us gently reflect with loving kindness. Feel from your heart with gentleness to your whole body. Make reflection to yourself inside 3 times for your precious human life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. May I be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. Sukhino wa kemino hontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings in all directions be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. That clear light that we come to rest in when we are deeply asleep. That clear light within which our dreams arise through the night. It is not just a clear light that arises in our heart, it is a clear light that is everywhere, and every single one of us comes to rest in the same place. And it's there that we are renewed and refreshed. So let go the grip of your mind and trust that night after night there is an intelligence at work behind your life that is doing everything it can to restore you. And the more you let go and step out of the way, the more it can do that for you. You're safe. You're safe. It's all right to take rest. Sukhino wa kemino hontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings in all directions be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. So let yourself rest now. May all beings be happy.